Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Sean Deneen.
And I'm Chandler Foster.
Today, we are talking about a man who didn't just write television, he rewired it. A man who took the American living room, gave it a mirror, and then made that mirror talk back.
That's right, Dr. Deneen. Today we're talking about Norman Lear. Norman Lear, the architect of shows like All in the Family, Good Times, The Jeffersons, and a quiet revolutionary who turned sitcoms into social battlegrounds.
Chandler and I, two guys who've spent a lifetime navigating expectations and labels and what society thinks we should and shouldn't be, Norman Lear's work hits very close to home.
Because he didn't just change television, he changed who got to be seen and how they got to be seen.
In order to understand that, we have to look at the pre Lear concepts of what made good television, what I call a safe world. So let's set the stage. Before Norman Lear, television was safe, predictable, and comfortable.
Yeah, almost aggressively so. Think Leave It to Beaver. Father knows best. Problems wrapped up in 22 minutes with a little bow on top.
And the biggest problem was the kid didn't want to go to the dentist or the boss was coming for dinner. No real conflict, no politics, no looking at gender, race, no looking at disability, no friction.
That's right. It was just a world where everyone behaved, and more importantly, everyone fit.
And if you didn't fit, you simply didn't exist.
And that's the key. Television wasn't just entertainment, it was a gatekeeper. It told America what normal looked like.
And for millions of people, including folks like us, that version of normal didn't include them except as objects of sympathy at best.
That's right. So the silence wasn't neutral. No, it was exclusion.
Norman Lear changed that with his landmark shows beginning with All in the Family.
All in the Family. Suddenly, you've got Archie Bunker, a loud, opinionated, deeply flawed man, saying things that people really weren't supposed to say out loud.
And here's the genius, folks. Lear didn't sanitize him. He let Archie be his uncomfortable self, but he didn't make him a caricature, a Klansman in better clothing.
But he also surrounded himself with people who challenged him, like Mike, the meathead, Gloria, his little girl, or even Edith, the dingbat.
Especially Edith. She clearly loved Archie. She was soft spoken, often dismissed, tried to keep the peace, but was morally grounded in a way that, without preaching, quietly dismantled Archie's worldview.
Lear understood something that was profound. You don't change minds by preaching, you change them by showing contradictions.
And suddenly, television wasn't about escaping reality anymore, it was about confronting it.
Now, let's talk about television as a social weapon. Now, Norman Lear tackled racism, sexism, poverty, war, and religion. And these were topics that all the networks were trying to avoid like the plague.
All of his shows did that. Good Times dealt with systematic poverty in the Chicago projects. The Jeffersons explored upward mobility in the black community. Maud took on women's rights, alcoholism, and even abortion.
And audiences didn't turn away, they leaned in.
Because for the first time, people saw pieces of their real lives, no matter what their political views, cultural, or racial background was, their real lives were reflected back at them.
And not as caricatures, but as complicated human beings.
Now, here's where it connects. To me, and in a different way to you too, Chandler, I live with an exceptionality, and whatever kind it is, neurological, physical, or social, when you live that way, you become very aware of who gets portrayed, how they get portrayed, and who doesn't.
And when you do appear, it's often flattened, inspirational, tragic, or even just invisible.
Lear broke that pattern, not specifically for disability, but structurally for television as a whole. He made television capable of multiple points of view and complexity.
He opened the door so that someday everyone could walk through it.
Let's talk about the power of discomfort. Lear refused to sugarcoat things. He thrived in a world that showed unpleasant realities and possible solutions, but left the audience to make up their own mind.
Exactly. And he trusted audiences to sit with tension, laugh, then immediately question why they were laughing. And I think that's a good combination.
It certainly is, Chandler. It's a very powerful tool. When you've often been the object of attention, it's good to be able to talk about things. You won't necessarily agree with everyone, and Lear didn't expect everyone to agree with him, but he just wanted to start the conversation. Archie Bunker is a walking document of mid 20th century certain types of social thinking.
Absolutely. Or it can lead to misunderstanding or being talked about instead of being talked to. And I don't like that, and I'm sure neither do you, Dr. Deneen.
Not at all. But he does that with all of his programs. As we said, Good Times deals with systematic poverty, unemployment, but an intact family.
And there's something that's kind of dignifying about that, being part of the conversation, even when it's messy.
You're quite right. Lear didn't make it easy. Let's take the Jeffersons, for example. George Jefferson has his own biases, his own blind spots, but he's navigating spaces Archie Bunker never could.
So, what did Lear actually change?
He changed the idea that we had to have a Star Wars type view of characters, perfect characters on one side, irredeemable villains on the other. All of his characters weren't symbols, they were real people.
So, shows like MASH and Hill Street Blues and The West Wing, they all owe a debt to Lear.
They certainly do. Because after him, nobody could pretend the real world didn't exist. Even more modern shows, The Good Doctor, Monk, showing characters with disability, shows that tackle race, mental health, and identity. They're walking through a door that he kicked open.
Absolutely. But here's the twist, the work isn't finished yet.
Not even close.
Oh no. Representation still struggles. Complexity still gets flattened. Stories still get filtered.
But the blueprint is there. Norman Lear respected Americans too much to give them easy answers.
No, he gave it better questions.
And in doing so, he made television something more than entertainment.
Yes, he did. He made it human.
Before we close here, I'm just going to talk about one of Archie Bunker's phrases that I use to explain discrimination to students when I've taught history. There's one episode called Mike's Move where the Stivics, Mike and Gloria, are thinking about moving to Minnesota. Archie is naturally quite opposed to this, and this is in 1976 during the bicentennial. And he makes this big speech about the Statue of Liberty, talking about all the non white and non Anglo ethnic groups in terms that I'm not going to repeat here. And then he says, all of them came in here, and they're all free to live in their own separate sections where they feel safe and they bust your head if you go in there. Now, on the surface, that sounds funny, or a remembrance of times past in New York where there were Irish, Jewish, Italian, and African American neighborhoods. But what the real meaning of that is segregation, whether by law, as during the Jim Crow period in the United States, by informal custom. So I use that term, all free to live in your own separate sections, to explain discrimination, apartheid in South Africa, the racial attitudes that were not murderous in the way the Nazis were, but very discriminatory and based on an obsession and inappropriate ideas about race. But I find students respond to that in a way they might not something else. So, ladies and gentlemen, we could talk about this forever. I think we are at the point now of having made our point. And I think this podcast will show a number of ideas. Chandler, I want to thank you for being a part of this because your perspective is always invaluable.
Well, I appreciate this, and I appreciate being a part of this particular podcast because I have been a fan of all these shows ever since I was little, and not just for their comedy, but the things that we talk about that they bring, the seriousness, the issues that they tackled. I learned a lot from some of these shows.
Me too. Growing up as I did with cerebral palsy, these things became my way of understanding the world, even things I didn't agree with, but they encouraged me to read up on things and learn more about the world. Where did these arguments come from? Because they didn't come out of a hat. They were the expression of good and controversial ideas at the same time. And I think we would not have the world we have today if it wasn't for Norman Lear. Anybody who's interested in looking at how television has developed, there's a more recent book called The Revolution Will Be Televised, looking at Mad Men, The Sopranos, Oz, other shows of a more recent vintage that are building on Norman Lear's legacy of inclusion, controversial topics, and societal development. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for listening. Come back soon. We have an awful lot to share. Please leave a like and a comment. Give us suggestions for topics if you like. And we're looking forward to seeing you soon.
And thank you for listening. We got some really good stuff coming up. Come back soon. Bye for now, folks.